You both have built two of the most important companies in crypto, both great companies in Galaxy and Pantera. Mike Novogratz, CEO and founder of Galaxy, and Dan Morehead, managing partner and founder of Pantera. Thank you both for coming on Galaxy Brains.
As I got my head around, I was like, this is the biggest trade of all time. And I still have that passion of it. I feel like we're just beginning.
Bitcoin's always had a really simple narrative, digital gold. Stay on message, people.
There's a ton of competition in the not Bitcoin sector. But Bitcoin crushed its use case. You know, these things like Bitcoin Strategic Reserve and stuff like that, it's just Bitcoin.
An infinite amount of cash.
I'm your host, Alex Thorne.
The U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Bitcoin made a new all-time high.
If you're not long, you're short.
Satoshi's going to come on there, laugh hysterically, go quiet, all Bitcoin's going to be erased.
Bitcoin's the best crypto out there.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
Welcome back to Galaxy Brains. As always, I'm your host, Alex Thorne, head of firm-wide research at Galaxy. Bitcoin not zero, and we have an excellent episode for you today. Dan Morehead, founder and managing partner of Pantera, joins me along with Mike Novogratz, CEO and founder of Galaxy, and we go into a ton, their origin story together, how they got into Bitcoin, what their vision of the future is for Bitcoin and stablecoins and digital assets, what their macro outlook is right now with everything going on in the world, and even what is happening in other blockchain ecosystems. Will Ethereum overtake Bitcoin? Will Solana overtake Ethereum? It's just a banger of an interview I know you'll enjoy. And BIMNet is off this week. Before I get to that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Let's hop right into the interview. Dan Morehead, managing partner, founder of Pantera, and Mike Novogratz, CEO and founder of Galaxy. Thank you both for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Thank you. It's a blast.
I've got to come since I'm that's part of Galaxy.
Well, thanks for paying for Galaxy Brains, Mike. This is going to be a great conversation. You guys have known each other for a long time. You also operate two of the largest companies in crypto. You've also owned Bitcoin for a long time. We're going to cover a lot of ground. I wanted to start, Dan, with you. You wrote a fascinating letter sort of looking forward and backwards about Pantera's, starting with their Bitcoin fund, the Pantera Bitcoin Fund, which launched in 2013. You shared some interesting history there, maybe as a way to start the conversation, talk about what you wrote about and where you started in Bitcoin.
Great. Yeah. So Mike's partner, Pete Brigger, got in touch and asked, what I was thinking about Bitcoin. And my brother had introduced it to me, and I read about it. And it was 2011. I thought, this is really cool. I got a libertarian streak. I'm like, I hope it happens, but I didn't actually do anything about it. So when I got that phone call, we had a coffee. I went into the office and Mike called in, and the coffee's like 4 hours, and I was like, oh man, this is just wild. And so they offered me an office in their building, and I think kicked me out 10 years later.
Yeah,
I stayed for 10 years. And just as I got my head around, I was like, this is the biggest trade of all time. And I still have that passion of it. I feel like we're just beginning. Like all the things that I was thinking back then, they're really still true today. And, it's 400 million people now, so it's actually starting to happen, but it's probably going to be 3 billion people in the, not too distant future, like, 5, 6, 7 years. So thinking about it, I just realized that, there's a bunch of protocols we call the internet. They do everything except finance and value and money transmission and things like that. And even in the 90s, Milton Friedman said that was the only thing missing from the internet is an e-cash system. Satoshi invented it, and it has such massive applications, right? And we're scratching the surface. There's some things that are working, but there's so many things that hasn't even approached yet. And all of these are the biggest, most valuable things. Like if you think about it, money transfer, Visa, MasterCard, remittance, and even just money, right? Like a lot of people don't ever think about money, but, governments print these paper pieces and, they normally get debased pretty quickly. So it just seems like Bitcoin is so, so important. And one of the things I remember writing back in that day was, Mike and I have been evangelizing Bitcoin for 12 years now, right? And so, and a lot of the arguments are still the same. That's a fun bit is, you still meet the retrograde people that say the same things. But one of the first guys I was pitching it to, he's like, oh man, it's just like buying gold. I'm like, no, it's like buying gold in 1000 BC. Like, it's buying gold before everybody else thought about it. And that's why I'm still bullish. I feel like, some people are in the space, and it has some traction now, but
Right.
it still feels super early.
Interesting. So then you guys bought Bitcoin?
I'll give you so me, my partner at Fortress, and Dan, were on the phone, and originally, Pete had gotten a call from Wenceslas, and he was in the same YPO group, and they were all talking Bitcoin, and Pete was a distressed debt guy, and so he called the macro guy, and I did a quick internet search, and I was like, chart looks good. A lot of libertarians. Everyone was worried about inflation. This was 2013, so you had the European financial crisis. Bernanke was on QE3 or QE2, and people were really worried about inflation, even though we didn't get it. And I was like, and the Chinese were buying, so that was my thesis. But it was really Dan who did a few weeks of work. When he came back, he was like, guys, this is going to change the whole world. Like, this is real. And I always tell this story. It's a little bit silly, but how much are we going to buy? Do you buy we're all pretty wealthy guys, and Pete and I, Fortress had just gone public, so we were feeling extra wealthy. Do you buy $100,000 worth? Do you buy $1 million worth? Do you buy? Well, Dan put a pretty big chip on the table, and Pete and I were like, well, we can't have a smaller chip than Dan. And so we all matched chips.
Wow.
And a lot of that wealth I always give Dan credit for, because, if you put one chip on the table and you get excited that one grows, if you put three, it's 3 times as big. And he probably 3x'd my bet. And we spent a lot of time thinking about, should it be a fund? And, originally we were going to be part of Pantera, and then it was just, it was complicated. And we were like, all right, Dan, we'll cheer for you on Pantera. We were investors. And we did a lot of things together. We bought Bitstamp as a group. We were early, day one, really in Ripple. I don't know if that was day 1 or day 10 or whatever. But so we started getting a venture portfolio. It had the same debate. Is it the picks and shovels, or is it the underlying? And so literally I've been on the journey. Dan was full-time, literally from the start. So he's probably done more Bitcoin speeches than I have, but I got to be a close second in the institutional world.
I think that's right.
And literally, I've just, I was a big investor. He had a couple spectacular funds. Thank you for that. And so just been supporting each other. It's interesting because we were just on a panel, and Dan always takes one step out. Like I'm a little too close to market sometime, and I'm thinking about what's the next month or 2 months, and Dan takes one step out. And he's like, God, we just have a new government that went from hating crypto to loving crypto. And we're not even, we were at 75 and now we're at 95 or 98, whatever. So, we're 25, 30% higher, not 300% higher. And so,
still more to go.
I think when you step back, the crypto and blockchain revolution is really just going to get started.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, if you look at we joke that Bitcoin. I was getting questions like a couple weeks ago during this. We've been in this range since the election, or sort of since the December time period, and journalist was asking like, why is Bitcoin crashing to 98K? And I was like, just like I'll answer that question, but like just think about what you just said. Just like say it a couple times to yourself. Is it surreal from where you start? Did you think we would get to 100K?
I was really focused on getting to 1,000, and that's what I saw. I actually said it in the FT in October of 2013. There's an article. It's the only time I was on the cover of the FT. Fortress's Novogratz says Bitcoin is a great investment, and I can flash that when people call me a shitcoiner. I can flash my article. And it got to 1,000. Chinese were buying, and I remember really wanting to sell because I could buy a jet, and I've never had a jet. And our third partner was like, "You're crazy. You can't sell this." And we didn't buy it to make 10x our money. We bought it because it's going to be, much higher. One day you'll build a library. Forget a jet. And he actually bought a bunch of Bitcoin on Fortress's balance sheet, which in essence blocked me from selling. I mean, if legally I could have sold, I would look like an asshole if I'm selling as one of the partners and the company's buying. And so, and like I thought, it went from 1,200 back to 200.
It didn't come back up until that was like 4.5-year bear market.
But I tell you what, this is a true story. I know in every bone of my body, if I had sold at 1,000, and When it went back to 200, I'd have bought a tiny amount. You know, once you start the process of selling, it's easy to keep selling, and so I'm not saying you shouldn't sell any. I wish I had all my Bitcoin I started with. I don't. That jet's very expensive.
Yeah.
Look back on it. I don't regret it, but it's really interesting how hard it is to hold these things, and so what's unique about crypto is we're finance guys, and so while Dan's probably got more of a religious zealous around this thing because he told the story more. I love this space, but we're still finance guys that grew up understanding markets. So many people in this space, this has been their obsession, and they just don't sell. We have clients or know of people that have giant piles of Bitcoin, and it's almost irrational that they don't diversify, and they are not parting with their coins. They see their net worth in how many Bitcoins they have, not in how many dollars they have.
Not as part of a treasury strategy, but as
Yeah.
they want the coins. They want ownership
Well,
of the
it's
network.
almost political philosophy for a lot of people. They don't care. Market goes up 7%. They don't care. Market goes up 100%. They don't care. Even Satoshi has 1 million Bitcoins. Doesn't care. Never sells any. Here's a great example of how much the industry's changed. So Mike says a couple weeks. It was 4 months until we did a trade, right? Like I read 16 hours a day about Bitcoin. I was just like, this is so cool. Talked about it. And when we first did the trade, we were going to do it in a kind of a different way, and we ultimately decided to do it as Pantera instead of potentially with Fortress. And so we didn't really have all the accounts set up because we were going to do it as a Fortress branded product. And so at the last second, Bitcoin had crashed from 130 to 65. We're like, oh, we got to go. This is the low print. So we tried to do all these trades, but we hadn't tested. We tested everything on the Fortress branded stuff. Luckily, we had put some old Pantera funds into a couple exchanges, and we thought we were kind of ready. So I sent a bunch of money to this little startup that had one employee. And on like July 5th or something, I go in there and try and buy 30,000 Bitcoin. And there's a pop-up that said your limit's $50. And sometimes at Wall Street, bucks means millions. No, like one Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah.
Like we can buy one $50 slug of Bitcoins every day. I almost had a heart attack because I was just about ready to go.
And then we got Bitcoin stuck at Mt. Gox. Luckily, we got them off Gox.
So then I sent an email uncharacteristically in all caps. I just sent you $2 million. Call me back. Because as a startup, they didn't have a phone or an address or anything. 4 days later, the only employee, this guy named Olaf, writes me back and says, okay, your limit's increased to $300. I'd still be doing that trade.
Oh my
God.
God.
Literally. If I could only trade $300 a day, we'd still be doing it. And now they trade $40 billion a day.
Wow.
Like, I love that. And the little startup's called Coinbase now, and people have heard of it. But they had one guy in a split-level condo in the Soma district of San Francisco, and I could do $300 a day.
Crazy.
That's wild.
And they were,
I remember
legit
how we got
exchange.
I remember getting coins stuck at Mt. Gox, and was it Jeff Lowe? One of my guys flew over there to get our coins back. We got them back.
So the funny thing is we actually, I think, got stuck in a wire. We tried to wire it, and then they got stuck, and I was like, okay, this is bad. So I flew over there, too. And I spent 2 days with Mark Karpelis and his other guy. And I was like, there's something going on here that's not good. And so I think we tried to cancel the wire, but then the wire got stuck. And, thank God we never had any money actually there.
Ironically, we all made a bunch of money on the Gox claims.
Yeah. But that was the Magic the Gathering online exchange. That was started to trade Magic cards. That's how early it was. Like
by Jed McCaleb.
Right, which is
we
crazy.
all forget that.
That's right.
Who founded
That's
Stellar
right.
and Ripple.
Yeah.
Super smart guy.
But like the biggest 80% of the trading volume at that time was at a former like Magic card trading venue. We've come a long way. Now you've got.
I'll tell you one more funny story, and then we can get to your questions. And Dan did more of the traveling on this stuff. So we decided we wanted to take a stake of Coinbase. And I remember meeting with Fred at a coffee shop by Fortress. He'd been a foreign exchange guy at Goldman Sachs. I was a foreign exchange guy at Goldman Sachs. I thought I could big brother him. I was like, dude. And we were teamed up with Benchmark, which was one of the great VCs in the world. I was like, take our money. Like, we want to invest. We've got Fortress and Dan, who ran a big macro fund, and Benchmark, and they were taking Fred Wilson and Andreessen, right? And I was like, take us both. Oh, and he just wouldn't let us in. And I was like, you got to let us in. And so our second prize was Bitstamp. And Bitstamp was bigger than Coinbase. It had become the number one exchange in the world because of Mt. Gox's problems. And so Dan, was it you and Pete or just you?
I went over there at least once, but then Pete came over as well.
Okay, they flew over in the jet to Serbia, right?
I flew coach. I met
Coach.
Pete.
Oh, yeah, he flew in the jet. Anyways, these guys, we bought 25% of their company for like $6.5 million. And there was a negotiation. They wouldn't do it, they wouldn't do it, they wouldn't do it. And at the end, Dan says, what if I throw in 2 Teslas? Done!
It's amazing.
They had the first Teslas in Slovenia.
Yes, they
Amazing.
got the 2 first Teslas in Slovenia. But look, again, young kids, $6 million, $6 million plus 2 Teslas. Done.
Yeah, big
The
difference.
other thing I love about those guys, the passion, is they went to that Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam in 2015. Like the Bitcoin Foundation had this huge conference. That was before, there's a conference every half hour these days, but that was very rare. So kind of everybody went. And Nate and Dami, the 2 founders, one was 21, one was like 22 or something. They were like, yeah, we drove our Teslas. They were super excited about it. Both of them. They each drove their own
like
Teslas.
next to each other. Like,
They each drove their
From
Teslas.
Slovenia to
From
Amsterdam.
they both
Slovenia.
wanted their own Tesla
I
in
was
Amsterdam.
Like, this is so awesome.
That is great. I love that. We've definitely come a long way. I mean, I think, and you both said that we're early. So this is a pretty abstract question, but like, let's say Bitcoin reaches that promised land. If you're, like a diehard Bitcoin maxi, it maybe replaces fiat currency. If you're more of a sort of macro thinker, maybe it replaces gold, right, or something. Whatever that is,
Gold.
How long does it take, and what does that world look like, or anything like that in your mind?
Listen, I think it can replace gold just through adoption, right? We are going through the largest wealth transfer in the history of the world, right? Baby boomers are going to die, sadly enough, and they're going to pass that money to the next generation, right? As that happens, I mean, my kids, their friends, my younger kids and their friends, they're online people. And so digital gold is going to be better than gold for them. So I just think that's a natural progression that happens with time, right, and adoption. You got to keep orange pilling people, and then it's going to be Bitcoin relative to gold. And so, gold's market cap is, I looked at it, 16 trillion, and Bitcoin is, 2 trillion, a little less than 2 trillion. And so there's kind of 8x, right? You get close to $1 million.
It doesn't feel like it's that far away, really.
And that could be 10 years, right? I pray it doesn't happen in some ways faster, because if you would see a hyper acceleration of Bitcoin, you would only see it because you would see a hyper devaluation of the dollar. And when you see what happens to countries whose currencies become toilet paper, right? Civil society breaks, rule of law breaks. I mean, you could just point to Venezuela or, recently, or Zimbabwe, or what's happened in like even Turkey, Nigeria. You really don't want to live in a country whose currency is plunging.
I have a $1 trillion bill from Zaire on my desk, right? So that can happen.
And so I don't think we will use Bitcoin to buy our Coca-Cola or fancy T-shirts, sneakers, or nice black dress shirt you got there.
Thank you.
I don't. I think we use stablecoins, but again, we're in a really weird political populist on the left, populist on the right, and so we'll see. I'm praying for Scott Bassett.
Yep. What do you think, Dan? Like, what's the promised land look like to you? Any different ideas?
Yeah, I think one perspective is the internet's 52 years old, and there's still cool stuff coming out all the time, right? And so when everyone's like, oh, there's no killer app of Bitcoin or whatever. No, Bitcoin's the killer app of Bitcoin, right? There are 300 million people already use it to store money, move value. And so it's going to be a progression. There's no light switch. Not like one thing's going to happen and it's going to change the world. But all you need to operate Bitcoin or crypto is a smartphone. There are 4 billion people to have one of those. 2.5 billion of those photos share on Facebook, right? And it's cool and all, but like financial inclusion for everybody on earth is more important. So easy under 10 years, you're going to have several billion people, 2, 3, something like that. using blockchain, and that'll be impacting all kinds of things we currently do. Gold's such a great benchmark. That's actually literally what I said in our first memo, and I invited Nathaniel Popper to our first summit and created the digital gold book and everything. It's a great analog, right? Like, it is going to replace gold. I think it's super fascinating that President Trump's proposing a Bitcoin strategic reserve to replace gold, which is totally rational, right? If you're the reserve currency of the world, you have to save in something. There's no other currencies, so we've been using gold for a long time. The U.S. stores 11 million years of workers' wages in gold under a stone pyramid in Kentucky. Pretty much the same as the pharaohs 40 centuries ago, right? It's so antiquated. So I'm a huge fan of storing in digital gold, and the U.S. should do it. I think a lot of our allies will do it. And then huge one is I think a lot of our adversaries are going to realize they got to do it too, because they don't want to be sitting there with $2 trillion of their entire life savings stored in a note that the U.S. Treasury Secretary can cancel, right? So I think that's all coming. And so 8x to Bitcoin market cap of gold, super easy to do, right? And that sounds crazy, right? In normal securities market standards, right?
Right.
But the fund that Mike and I invested in a long time ago, it's gone up 3 orders of magnitude. Like, one more, it just doesn't seem that hard.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, what's also interesting is you're going to see, the same journey that every crypto person takes. They start with Bitcoin, they understand it, and then they move into Ethereum, and they start figuring out what stable coins are, and now meme coins. They look into the space. It's just going down the rabbit hole was the original expression. Mm-hmm. Institutions and governments are going to do, and right now, I said that there are $2 trillion of cash bills, a lot of those in hundreds stored in pillowcases in, countries where the stewardship of the government is so bad that the citizens are worried that their hard-earned labor is going to evaporate. And so they've traditionally kept it in $100 bills. As that switches to stable coins or Bitcoin, but let's just talk stable coins, great. As that switches to stable coins that pay interest, which are happening overseas already, better. And so it's not just a kind of an intellectual game. It's a life-changing thing for people to be able to, in the Gambia or Zambia or Venezuela, take their hard-earned labor, convert it into a dollar or a Bitcoin, get paid interest on it, stake it if it's Ethereum, and actually have financial inclusion on your phone. Yeah. And even in places like the U.S., where our payment systems work pretty well, so I think we're going to see less payment adoption here because, Apple Pay's pretty freaking good. We still have a ton underbanked. And, if we start cracking that door open, like the efficiency gains, are gonna start accruing to people that traditionally get screwed. Right, there are $8 billion a year in banking overdraft charges. All of that goes to poor people. And so there is something very progressive about this libertarian movement, right? I always thought crypto was as much progressive as libertarian.
I think so.
Because it's supposed to bring access with less friction to the masses.
It almost makes financial inclusion or having a bank account almost capable of being a human right, to be honest.
It should be a human right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a piece on that the U.S. partisan battle really got Bitcoin upside down. It's the progressive's dream. And I listed out 15 features of Bitcoin, financial inclusion for 4 billion people. It's there's no boundaries, no borders. Anyone can use it. No discrimination. 24/7. Free to store your wealth. All those things. If anyone adopted it, it should have been the progressive, right? It's so wonderful, and it's on our Twitter feed if people want to read it because it is so compelling. Because it should be bipartisan, like any technology. Like the cell phone is not partisan, but to the extent anyone needs to make things partisan, it's a really cool progressive thing.
Yeah, I agree.
And Mike's point on wealth transfer, I think, is super important. 90% of the wealth in the United States is in people 70 or older, right?
90%.
That's
And
crazy.
that is not fair or whatever. And I think the thing that politicians are realizing is the majority of Americans are under 40. They love crypto and they vote, right? And so it's totally changing the dynamics
That
here.
was the biggest shift. And I saw the Democrats, who I was down there beating on the heads, all start getting it, and it was just too late. As a matter of fact, Kamala Harris, the day after she got the nomination, really debated going to Bitcoin Nashville because they were pressuring to go, and they realized this crypto vote was so important. And I think what they also realized was they'd already lost it, and hopefully it wasn't so important. That was the approach they took. And they thought they only had 5 states to worry about, and in those states it wasn't as important. I think they were wrong, but that's the decision they made. That's why. But they realized they kind of lost that momentum, and it all really happened around that Bitcoin National Con. It was that month up into it.
What a wild time, because now President Trump, he said at the Libertarian Party National Convention that he was going to pardon Russ Ulbricht. Then he had that fundraising meeting in Mar-a-Lago with a bunch of Bitcoin miners and I think some other industry people. Yep. And that this all happened like May, June, July, right? And then obviously he gave that. I mean, I edited his speech in Nashville down to just the specific crypto-related statements, and it's still 14 minutes of like bangers, basically every single thing crypto industry had asked for. It was going to be hard to compete.
I
with
agree,
that.
actually, because I when he said he was going to speak, I decided to go and be on a panel just because I want to hear it and experience it, right? Because it was a massive sea change for our industry. And the speech was about an hour, but if you actually distilled it down, it was about 10 bullet points, all but one of which totally rational.
Right? What was the one that wasn't in your mind?
So the one that I don't get, and maybe I don't have as much passion on this, is his executive order just recently is to protect citizens from central bank digital currencies. And there's a lot of things I'm worried about in the world today. FedCoin is not one of them.
Yeah, I think it was easy for maybe Republicans specifically, but politicians to come out against the CBDC, knowing that that was like maybe one of the least controversial things they could say that would signal to the crypto vote that they were on their
Well,
side.
listen, again,
I'm not sure. The Fed doesn't want to do it. They've
I'm not
made that
sure.
pretty clear.
So
yeah, what do you think?
the beauty of decentralized systems is privacy. And we as a society don't think you get 100% privacy. We think as a society, we want to stop you from terrorist financing. And so how do we do that? The threat of CBDCs is complete opposite of privacy, right? If the government runs the entire blockchain, they have all the data. If you were in Canada and Trudeau you didn't like the vaccine, Trudeau froze your bank account. And so this idea of having one government knowing everything scares people. Now, again, we're not going to have a stable coin with no regime. I am a big advocate that just like when I drive my car, if I'm going 70 and they catch me, I get a ticket, but they don't have a thing in my car that sends a signal every time I'm going over 55.
Just prints a ticket
I don't
right
know,
there.
but the thing, everyone's privacy is so important. Google reads all your Gmail, right? Like, no one cares about privacy. They don't really. People love to say it. Their entire business models read every private communication you send and sell you crap that matches what you're telling your friends you want to do, right? And so while there are some people that really care about privacy and they really should use a non-government issued currency, my mom wants to use FedCoin, right? Like, she doesn't care. Like, and so my only point is every real country is going to have a stablecoin, right? Like,
But
the UK.
But you can have a stablecoin that runs on a public blockchain versus a stablecoin that runs on a private blockchain owned by the government.
Sure. I'm just saying it is a absolute and complete reality that every real country will have a central bank digital currency, and the longer the U.S. waits, the less the more Red Army coin takes over, right? Like, it's just,
Maybe.
that's
I think
the reality.
You know
right?
what's interesting about like a Fed issued coin? A lot of things are interesting. You guys have said a lot of ones that are, but also if you can issue straight up like Fed master account dollars, basically, then they don't have to buy treasuries, right? They just print the CBDC. And one of the big arguments that you guys have both said plenty about over the years, but now we're hearing, Howard Lutnick say it and Scott Bessent say it, is that stablecoins and key members of Congress, stablecoins can be a big buyer of our sovereign debt. You've said that it was it's probably the 13th biggest buyer of treasuries. So it's actually like one of these, and we need buyers of treasuries, don't we? Right. So it's almost an argument, even if you could, and it might even be better to just be issued directly from the Fed.
Well, you think about when Facebook was doing Libra, part of their plan, which they never rolled out, was to literally buy every foreign exchange kiosk in the world, and they were going to let you change your local currency into Libra, which was at that point going to be a basket of based on a basket of currencies, and over time would be its own currency. In some ways, we should have little kiosks all over the world. Buy your dollars. Come get them. Come get them.
Yeah, that's what stablecoin is. And the kiosk is 4 billion smartphones,
Yeah.
right? Like that is the way to sell U.S. debt, which is, Mike and I agree, unsustainable the way it is now, to new customers. You have to find new customers to do this because the bond market's choking on.
We worry
current.
too much about Chinese taking their money out of China and putting it into dollars. We should want them to take their money out of China and put it into dollars. If we literally think China's a threat, we should want Russian money out of the ruble and into dollars. Yeah. I get where they're worried about the use of fund or the source of that money. Maybe somebody stole it. That should be Russia's worry or China's worry. It's a very interesting. I had this conversation in D.C. with a bunch of people, and they're like, "What? Well, let me think about that."
There's an interesting story that's related to this. Bill Gates was asked once in the 90s. Some reporter was like, there's 20 million pirated copies of Windows in China. Doesn't that make you mad? And he was like, well, I'm happy if they're going to pirate something, I'm happy it's ours and not somebody else's. He's like, I'd rather have them using my thing. And I kind of think about your point here about the dollar, exporting the dollar in a similar way. It's like, well, sure. I mean, if we're not going to get rid of the criminal organization in XYZ country, shouldn't they at least conduct their trade in dollars? It's almost
like you get a company like Chainalysis or
that's what I mean. You could get more insight into it. Yeah,
they're pretty good at catching the bad shit.
Yeah, and criminals do their job all day, regardless of what exists, and they'll use cash, they'll use SWIFT, they'll use all kinds of things. So that's like a tiny fraction, 1 or 2% of commerce in blockchain. But the point is 99.6% of stablecoins are backed by U.S. Treasuries. That is a great way to export our debt to literally 4 billion people. So, and I think actually that's one of the things that helped President Trump become pro crypto is it is a very good way to export our debt.
It is. Let's talk a little bit about debt for a few minutes about macro. You guys are both former macro fund managers, current and macro guys and traders, and
once a macro guy, always a macro guy.
I guess that's right. And I think this is a very interesting time, not just because of the geopolitics or the rates or the debt and those are all obviously have been factors, continue to be, but also the tariffs. What is your take? What are we and the deficit and the Doge? Like, what is your current view of like what is happening right now? Because I think even the media, it's going so fast, the media is struggling to keep up.
Really simple framework. We were running 7% debt. Deficit. That's 4% more than we should be running, at least. When I worked at the Office of Management and Budget in 1984, when we were freshmen in college, I learned that the government tries to spend 20%, tries to tax 20%, and that balances the budget. It happened one year, 1999. But 20% was the magic number. That's drifted up to 27%. And that drift really accelerated with Trump's first term when he just wanted to spend, and then COVID. And then Biden was just like, pull out all stops. And we've normalized this giant deficit spending, and that will literally lead us to our destruction. Elon was one of the few guys talking about it on the campaign trail. Democrats and Republicans just want to look the other way. And he got that focused. And so Bessent is one of us, the opposite of Kendrick Lamar's song. He's a macro guy. He understands the plumbing as well as anybody in the world. And so he knows my job is to get debt to GDP starting to head from 135 back to 100. My job is to get the deficit from 7% to 3%. And that's not easy, right? Especially with the president who doesn't want to cut taxes. So for him, it's growth, and growth, right? So cut regulation, confidence back in the country, growth. I was having a off-the-record chat with him, and it was a little bit like, hey, my job is to get the gold price lower. And I was like, oh, you can't do that to Bitcoin. And he was like, I think we're going to be so pro-crypto that adoption should outweigh it. But if Bessent does his job well, and Elon helps by cutting waste in the government, which that's going to be harder to do, the pace of Bitcoin acceleration will slow. Right? There are always two vectors. One is the macro story, and one is adoption. I think adoption is about to accelerate, and that should overwhelm the macro story. But the macro story is also important, and it's not just a U.S. macro story. Europe's a mess with their deficits right now. Japan China is probably the biggest mess. Bessent just said today, China is an economy in more trouble than any he's seen in his whole life. Pretty big statement for the Secretary of Treasury to say that about your second largest economy in the world. And so even if the U.S. gets it right, the rest of the world's going to have a hard time getting it right. So I still think the tailwind's there for macro, but that's what you got to watch. And, we'll see. They've got the first, reconciliation coming up next month. The House is this close, and the Senate is this close. And so while Trump's got this momentum, he's going to run into the wall of Congress pretty soon, and it's going to be harder than you think.
Well, I say, the deficit is supposed to be countercyclical. Is, when you're in a recession, you should have a deficit to stimulate the economy, and then theoretically, like Mike said, you're supposed to run a surplus, which has only happened once. If you're running 7% in literally the best of times, there's nothing better that could be happening right now. It just seems like something bad's going to happen someday. I don't know what it is, but we're at full employment. Everything's great. Stock market's all-time high. Everything's all-time high. If we're running 7% deficit, something bad's going to happen. And that would be my argument. And Mike said, I like to zoom out. I do like to zoom out on this one. The little tariff tantrums here and there, I don't know. I have no insight if it's going to be good or bad or whatever. But if you zoom out in any kind of multi-year time frame, 1 or 2, 3, 4 years, people are going to want to escape paper money that's being debased at a really rapid rate and go into hard assets like real estate, stocks, gold even, or digital gold, right? And so that's the trade in getting out of paper money. And you're talking about the Zimbabwe dollar. Yeah, it's one of the worst paper currencies. But the U.S., we debased our currency 8% in 2021, and everyone's like 3-something. Oh, that's cool. You do that your entire life, it's 90% of your wealth is gone, right? So, and I think
tell them the story about the British pound sterling.
Oh yeah, no, it's my favorite. The oldest currency on earth, 1,000 years. And when I was at Tiger Management, Lady Thatcher was on our advisory board. And, Julian would get busy sometimes. And so my job would be to sit there for 8 hours with her and talk. And, so fascinating. And that was when the ERM, exchange rate mechanism preceding the euro was coming in and whether the pound was going to go in or not. I got the ultimate, tutorial. I just sat there and talked about it. 1,000 years they've been doing this. It used to be convertible into, of course, a pound sterling. And now it takes 184 pieces of paper pound sterling to buy a pound of sterling silver. And again, that's the good paper currency.
Right.
Zimbabwe, Argentina.
184.
That's crazy. That's insane.
But, and so I think
it's worth
Mike's point is
184th of what it started out as.
Yeah.
Mike's point is so important. We're having this massive baby boom to new generation switch. And those people, they grew up online, mobile phones, mobile money totally makes sense to them. They don't, it's no biggie. And here's the thing I think is super important. The Fed manipulated the bond market, $9 trillion of buying, which was 200% of all mortgages issued in the United States, one of the biggest policy errors of all time, drove the mortgage rate down to 2.5, the 10-year to 50 basis points or whatever. They basically dared you not to buy a house. And people did. Record number of people did. Every house in America went up 50%. So there's a whole generation of kids that literally can't afford a house. So they're trading, speculating, whatever you want to call it, in crypto. And I actually think it's totally rational, right? I don't have a problem with that. As that money transfers, those people will be buying crypto assets from, as the next generation comes in. And it'll continue.
The price of a house from 2012, when Satoshi kicked off, 09. So 2012, when we were getting about 2013, 2012, 13, to now has doubled.
Yeah.
In America, doubled.
Yeah.
It went from 200,000 to 400,000.
It's crazy.
Roughly.
Well, and there's just you mentioned the young people too, and I'm not that young, but I graduated.
Salaries haven't doubled.
No, they haven't. But I graduated right
Yours
into the
did.
great financial crisis from
Yours,
college.
yours did. Let's be clear about that.
Thank you, Mike. But the millennials, the right in the main millennial, not even forget the Zoomers they definitely couldn't afford a house right now. But the millennials graduated into the Great Recession, the Great Financial Crisis, and then when they finally were about to go be able to buy houses, then everything mooned when people moved out of the cities and bought houses during COVID.
Yeah.
And the rates are higher than they've been in 30 years.
So you're complaining that you don't own a house.
It's not the best. Yeah.
You're complaining you don't own a house.
That's right. But I mean, it's an iconic thing. And did the houses double in value or did the dollar debase? I mean, is it both? It's both, right?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. But yeah, again, assets are really driven by interest rates, and when you have interest rates, one of the interesting things now is, so like, I mortgaged up everything I owned when it was 2.5%. Even like I didn't really need to. I was like borrow as much as I can against that house at 2.5%.
Yeah.
And now that 30-year mortgages are 7%, you look at the value of a big mortgage and you're like, whoa, it's,
Making
Yeah.
money.
you've made a lot of money. Like sometimes as much as 50% of what you thought your mortgage was but you can't monetize that. You can't transfer the mortgage. And so you're kind of stuck in your house. I'm not giving up that mortgage.
Another reason why the
That's why
houses are
house
so
sales
expensive.
are record lows.
That's right.
Even though the price is record highs, no one can afford to move
Right,
because they have such a great mortgage.
Right, the average person just owns one house, and if
Yeah.
they sell it, they've got to take out a new mortgage, and it could be triple the monthly
It's
cost.
a fascinating time with record prices and record low transactions. Like it's never happened.
It's shocking. We could go on and on about this, but I want to hit a few other crypto topics before we wrap. We talked a lot about stablecoins, so we'll skip that for a minute. One of the very interesting stories, obviously things too, but stories in crypto has been the interplay between Bitcoin and Ethereum, and now also the interplay between Ethereum and Solana. I'll start with the first one, and then let's talk about Solana as a challenger is quite interesting. ETH BTC is down like 75% since the merge. It's down 50% just since the ETH ETFs were announced in June of last year. One, what do you think that tells you? And two, when does that ratio reverse?
So, listen, Bitcoin's always had a really simple narrative, digital gold. Now, some people try to change it a little bit with ordinals and all this other crap. It's digital gold. Stay on message, people. Digital gold. Because this is all about narrative. It's the technology allowed it, but the value comes from the social construct. You think it's got value. I think it has. That's why it has value. Dan has probably told that story to more people than anybody I've ever met. Michael Saylor's getting close. He's got a lot of reach. But right, this idea of people believing it, that's what gives it its value. So Ethereum had a story, which was we're going to be the base layer of trust. We are going to be this global decentralized database that is trusted, is decentralized, and is fast. And it's going to take us time, and it's run by an unbelievably noble guy, Vitalik, who doesn't care about money, who cares about this revolution. There's all kinds of stuff being built on it. It's still the second biggest ecosystem by a long shot. It's got a place here, but there's a lot of competitors. And one of the reasons I think the prices of all these alts are going down is there are too many of them. There's an infinite amount of token supply coming up, from Trump coin to new L2s to new bridges and there's not enough time for those narratives to build community. And so when I look at why is Cardano still one of the bigger coins, or XRP? Because they got started early when there were not as many choices and they built community. If I launched a coin today, like the Novo coin, it would be a lot harder to build community.
A lot more competition.
A lot more competition. And so, yeah, if you're Trump or Kanye or someone really famous, you might be able to get a surge. Mm-hmm. But is it a resilient community? Does it stay engaged? And so I think it's going to be harder for new projects to really gain sustainability unless there's utility. Right now, there's very little utility in the valuations. Mm-hmm. The valuations is all based on community.
Yep.
And we're going to have to watch that play. So I think Ethereum doesn't get put, Bitcoin's its own box, and then it's Ethereum and all the other stuff combined. And, they've gone through some growing pains. It took a while to get fast enough. Right now, some of the L2s are faster than Solana or just as fast. But, so we'll see. I would not sell it short down here. I think you're probably in the buy zone of Ethereum. But there hasn't been that trigger event that gets people talking about it again. Remember why Ethereum mooned? NFTs.
Yeah, I was going to say Jimmy Fallon holding up a Bored Ape on television.
NFTs. So that was where you always got to where's the money flowing? Where's the excitement? Where's the heat? Why Solana mooned? Memes.
Yeah.
The Trump.
They're denominated in Sol.
We should have sold all our goddamn Sol at 300 on the night of the inauguration. All of it. And could have bought it back here at 180. Right? That was a zenith of, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right? $70 billion. I think that was, we always have a lot of bad things that happen in the crypto market because it makes us look foolish for a while. And then you're like, guys, that's the life we've chosen. It's not Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, there's a broad spectrum of value or historic game-changing stuff all the way down to tokenized memes, right? It's
Listen, memes are pretty fun. They're a game for people. They're a gambling app. I got no problem with memes. It got a little carried away with the $76 billion
in
first
2
day
days.
launch.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're suffering the fallout of that. And I think that woke people up to saying, wait a minute, can anyone just launch one of these things? And does that mean all these altcoins just have infinite supply? And I think there's some truth to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dan, what about Solana here as a player? Because Mike alluded to this, and also we actually wrote a report. You remember our L1 report in 2021, where we said that, again, set Bitcoin aside, the general purpose blockchain is Ethereum's game to lose, but here's the 10 challengers. Solana was on there. I think it's very clearly like the third chain here at this point. Does Solana ever flip Ethereum? No one ever. The Ethereum guys always talk about Ethereum flipping Bitcoin in market cap, but what about Solana? It's clearly been ascendant.
Yeah, I think Mike's point about competition is super important. There's a ton of competition in the not Bitcoin sector, right? But Bitcoin crushed its use case and is its own thing. And if you think about, these things like Bitcoin Strategic Reserve and stuff like that, it's just Bitcoin. They're not talking about, let's do Bitcoin and ETH Strategic Reserve or Bitcoin, ETH, and Sol. And in the same way, the U.S. only invests in gold, right? We don't do platinum and silver and all that stuff like palladium, So I think that is super important. There's Bitcoin, which has no competition, and then the everything else sector. In there's, different features. Like Mike said, I think there's going to be lots of important L1s, not just one of them. Mm-hmm. And Solana is, has more throughput and all those features that people like. And it caught the wave of meme coins. And like Mike says, the world spends $300 billion a year on gambling. Why not gamble on something called a meme coin? I have no kind of philosophical problem with that. And so actually one of our largest positions is Solana. I think it is it's a very important L1. And it's trading about a third the market cap right now of ETH. Could keep appreciating.
Yeah. What about mainstream sort of Web 2 apps that add blockchain or coins? The most obvious one that comes to mind to me is Telegram. They have, I guess, they spun it out or something, right? It's the open network, but obviously started as Telegram specifically. Telegram widely used in crypto and globally.
We were talking about this before. It's fascinating to me because one of the great CEOs on the planet, in Vlad, smart as can be, tight team, does the coding himself, built an amazing app, and he's an amazingly principled guy. How do you flip that from this messaging app that was built to a finance app? And they're trying. I think it might put payments on there. It might get as much use as anything. There isn't yet a complete correlation between usage of blockchains and valuation of blockchains. You see that in the gaming space. There's one gaming blockchain that's 10 times the valuation of another that does the same volume. And so the dominant feature that drives valuation in crypto is community. And that community of people that care about value, care about getting other people to buy their coin. A community based around a shared narrative. And that shared narrative is often the utility that's coming. And so Telegram's trying to do it the opposite way, saying, we already got the utility. And so it'll be fascinating. I've gone back and forth of having a huge position in this thing, of wanting to and not being able to kind of get it at the right time, and it ran away on me. But it's one I feel short because it has this immensely talented CEO, and it's got an immensely, distributed 950 million, billion people using it, and crypto people using it. And so it'll be the great experiment. Can you top down it instead of bottom up it?
Really interesting.
Yeah, so we actually put our biggest dollar investment ever in the open network a year or two ago. For a couple of reasons. One is I had lunch with the founder, mesmerizing, his conviction, willing to leave his country, keep building this thing. He's built the entire thing with 40 people and no capital.
Incredible.
Like literally never issued equity, 40 people.
And he's jacked.
Unbelievable to be able to do all that. But the other reason we put it in the portfolio in a big way is, like Mike was saying, there's competition. There's 24,000 blockchain protocols according to CoinMarketCap. 23,999 are a really cool piece of technology trying to build a community. And like Mike said, back in 2012 with Ripple, it was a little easier than it is in 2025. It's hard to build a community. Telegram is the opposite, is a billion-person community trying to do a blockchain, right? And there's a lot of people that know how to do that these days. It's not as hard, right? Creating a community out of nothing, pretty tricky. Writing a blockchain is not. And so we have a portfolio of all kinds of bets. Almost all of them are technology bets looking for a community. It's great to have a community trying to do tech.
Yeah.
And the important thing about that is there are only 4, I think, billion-person communities, all of which are frozen out of the blockchain except Telegram. Libra, which David Marcus did at Facebook, unbelievably beautiful technology, was a great idea. Everything about it was great. DOA when it was announced, right?
Mm-hmm.
China has frozen all their massive communities out of blockchain. There's Telegram. It's the only one left, right?
Yeah.
And so as an
WeChat,
investor,
Alipay.
right, I just want to be long it because, again, I wouldn't put all of my mom's retirement savings into the TON token and just hope. It's in a basket, man, it should be a huge position because it's the only one that's totally
I gotta
different.
go buy some.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm convinced right now.
It is
honestly.
the only one that's totally different.
You got to keep your eye on it. It is
Yeah.
interesting.
It's
Well,
also
and so,
yeah.
Mike, I love your thing. We're traders, man. Being short is the worst feeling, right? You feel short, right?
Yeah.
And I don't feel short the other 23,000 tokens, right? If I wake up tomorrow and I find out something went up 50x, I'd be like, whatever, If you don't have enough of ton and it's only a couple percent of East market cap, right? Like
Small.
it's de minimis right now. If you wake up and find out it's a third of East market cap next month, you're going to be pissed.
From a user experience, the Telegram app is by far the best messaging app basically that I've used, and I use them all. It's the one you get like Slack on the terrible side, and then all the way on the best.
Well, look how fast they spin up games because they're so easy to use, right?
Yeah.
Like Axie Infinity took like 5 years or whatever to get to a couple million people. They do 40 million in like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
130 I think of wallets and 950 could have a wallet or whatever. The numbers are just so huge.
All right, very last question. You guys have been very successful. You're on I don't know what I would call this in terms of career, but it's perhaps each of you on like your third career at this point. Like, what keeps you going? Like, why, what's driving you to do more? Is it something personal passion? Is it interest? What is it?
The only way to stay young is being curious and working with young people. And this is a fascinating industry. You have to be curious to really understanding meme coins was fascinating to me. And I did it to my son-in-law, who's a fucking meme expert, and he's really good at it. But I watched, he knows more about crypto than I know, just how he's trading the memes on the exchanges, on the DEXs. And so I think it's curiosity, and it's young people. You go to a party with all people our own age, and it sucks. Sorry, friends.
What about you, Dan? What keeps you passionate?
A1, like Mike said, super intellectually interesting. Like every day my head's throbbing with all the stuff I'm trying to learn. It's super fun. But I love the passion of the community, right? Mike and I and our other partner at Pete Berger that we talked about this a couple times, we've done a lot of trades. We made some money for our employers, and some pension plans got one more basis point for their beneficiary. But in the end, who actually cares, right? Like all that stuff we were generating for our investors, just not that big a deal. This is going to change the world for billions of people, right? Like this is so important. And so if we can be just a little bit of pushing this thing, it's just great. It'd be something I'd be super proud of. 20 years from now, 3 billion people are using it, and you're not paying 300 basis points for a credit card swipe. Migrants aren't working for a month for their remittance company.
I would tell you this, when I left Goldman Sachs, and it wasn't the most pleasant exit. I was sitting in Vail with 3 other ex-partners, and I was 33, maybe 34. I was the youngest. The other guys weren't that much older than me. One guy was 45. And I came up with this. Guys, here's our challenge. If Goldman Sachs is on our obituary, when we die, we failed.
Interesting.
And I was like the president of Goldman Sachs Latin America. I had a nice, good title. I was like, if it's on our obituary, we failed. We've got multiple chapters left. And I was thinking about that. I was like, no matter what I do, crypto is going to be on my obituary.
It is. I love
it's tattooed to me. And so I think there's something. It does feel like it's new. There's something important to it. We were there early. There's something fun being there early. You're trying to make some contribution, hand the baton to other people. And this is a game that it is decentralized. There's not a king of Bitcoin. There's not a CEO of Bitcoin or any of these ecosystems. And, Ethereum doesn't really exist without Joe Lubin. And he was not a founder. He was a founder, but it was really Vitalik who founded it. There's lots of different people needed to get these communities going. And so we have a lot of free riders. I always want to kick them in the rear end. But there are a lot of non-free riders from people that are working on the Bitcoin code, those freaking in the temples of just trying to change one little piece. And some guys will work their whole life and never actually change anything, but they're still working on it.
It's crazy.
To the salespeople, to traders. And so I do think everyone's got something to pitch in, and it feels good to be part of a community.
You both have built 2 of the most important companies in crypto, both great companies in Galaxy and Pantera. So invaluable for you to share your ideas and your stories with our audience. So I really appreciate it. Mike Novogratz, CEO and founder of Galaxy, and Dan Morehead, managing partner and founder of Pantera. Thank you both so much for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Awesome. Thanks.
It's been a blast.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thank you so much to our guest, Dan Morehead, managing partner and founder of Pantera, and Mike Novogratz, CEO and founder of Galaxy. Everyone have a safe and happy weekend, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXY Research. See you next week.